Yeah. So, yeah, welcome everyone for this retreat. This first talk, we're going to be talking a lot about this theme that we've been picked on, and I really like this this song that we started with, that was "Just to Be With You" by a band called Third Day, and it talks a lot about the ideas we've got of love, but then later it compares a lot with the ideas that Jesus has about love, which can be a little bit different than our own. But when we start to know who Jesus is, everything that he does for us, it's pretty amazing. And then this is what Jesus hopefully will be talking to us today about. When we're talking about loving others, loving God, we'll hopefully be learning from him how to do that in the best possible way. And we've used this theme of the theme that we started with today is John 13:34. So those who, if you have a Bible with you, it's great to have that for when we pray and have a retreat. I'll read out John 13:34 and also verse 35, which is going to be the basis of this first part of the talk. And we'll have a chance to pray with it a bit later. And also we'll be using some other passages from the Bible as well too. But John 13:34 says this, and it's Jesus speaking: "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You should also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." This is what we're going to be praying a lot about and sort of unlocking a little bit as we go. This theme of, yes, Jesus gave us this way of life, living in a certain way that has love at the center. And especially we wanted to apply it to lockdown, because that's what we're all living, most of us, I think anyway. How to live that, how to love people in lockdown. And when we were discussing about how to structure this retreat amongst ourselves, Father Daniela and myself, we were thinking that, okay, we want to focus on the importance of loving in lockdown. But before we do that, we have to also focus on the importance of why loving is so important in general, if we're going to go into this commandment that Jesus gave us. So this first part will be focusing a little bit more on why should we be loving. And then the second part, which Father Daniele will give it later on, will probably focus a little bit more on how we can do it in different ways. And of course, the idea is these little meditations or guidelines that we give of prayer, it's for you to be led into a time of prayer where you yourself find the answers from God. So hopefully what we give helps, but the idea is to lead you into a retreat, a time of prayer. So when I was praying this morning with that, I found it very fascinating that this was a commandment by Jesus. As he says, "I give you this new commandment, that you love one another, and then just as I've loved you, love other people." And I was praying a bit about that. Jesus really must have found it super important that we know how to love, if that's what he's gave us as our basic commandment on way of life. And I was starting from that point going, well, how come that's so essential? How come loving, according to Jesus, is the most important commandment? And going back a little bit further, my question was a little bit, do all human beings need to love other people? And I don't know whether you've had that bit of a question or not. Like, is loving something that really all people must do or not? Because I've always understood love as a decision, as something that you do because you want to do it. And yeah, when I was praying a bit about that, I thought it'd be very good to go back to the beginning, go back to creation, go back and look at why God created us, how God created us as well too. And then from there, hopefully unlock a little bit about this reason why love is so central to our life. So if you go back to the story of Genesis, if you go in Genesis 1, and we don't need to all read the story of Genesis, I think most of us probably know it, but when we have our time of prayer, you can go and read it quickly. And of course, I was focusing a little bit upon, okay, quite interesting that God created everyone, all the different parts of nature and all of creation, and then man was like, or humankind was the last sort of thing created. And we know that when he created us, he said that he created us in his image and likeness. So if you go to Genesis 1:26, well, actually start on 25, it says, God made all the wild animals of the earth of every kind, the cattle of every kind, everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image and according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over all the earth. And I was starting from that point, found this really fascinating. And recently as well too, like I was thinking also of how we try and explain to sometimes I've used this story a bit with young kids about what does Genesis tell us about our way of life. So you can see that in this, and if you can imagine the story of creation, at the beginning, God created everything. And imagine he created all the animals, and then one by one, all the animals started coming up to God. And think about them coming up to him and asking him the question, what am I meant to be doing? Because he's created them. He saw that they're all good. But I like using this as a bit of an image. So imagine like the birds came up first, and they came up to God and they said, oh God, what am I meant to be doing? And then God got them to look at themselves, said, look at your wings, look at the feathers that you've got there, look at how your body is shaped. You're made to fly. So fly. And then they started to fly, and then they feel very happy because they learned how to fly, and that's what they're actually made to do. That's what gives them joy. And that's what gives God glory as well too, as he's a creator. Then imagine the fish comes up, and the fish obviously still in water, can't come up to God on the ground like the others. What am I meant to be doing? I haven't got wings, I can't fly. And then God saying, okay, look at yourself as well too. Look at your gills, look at your fins. You're meant to be in water. You're meant to be swimming. So of course, oh, wow, very cool. So I start swimming. And how happy it was in that moment, recognizing what it's really meant to be doing. And then imagine, the koala bear comes up, and then the koala bear's not really much for anything, doesn't seem to be, except God says, okay, you're very good at eating. So you're there, you can be in a tree the whole time, you can eat the whole time, you can be cute and cuddly. Ah, very cool. That's what it learned to do. So it was able to do what it was meant to do. Then the human being came up. And then when we've come to God, imagine what we would say. Okay, we don't have wings. We can't really stay in water for too long. Some of us are more cuddly than others, or more likable than others in different ways. But imagine that saying that same question to God. What am I meant to be doing with my life? What's my purpose? And I really like what God would say to you in that moment. He would say, I believe, going by this passage of Genesis 1:26, you're the most special of the lot. Look at all the other ones that we've created. You're the only one that's being created in my image and likeness. You're meant to do what I myself do. You're created to love. Imagine how special that makes you feel. Imagine the joy you feel when that's what you're really meant to be doing with your life. And this isn't just like a cute story, it's the truth. If we're created in the image and likeness of God, what is God except love? God is a communion of love. The Father loves the Son so much that the love between them is so great that the Holy Spirit is that person of love. If you look at 1 John 4, verse 8, and it talks a lot about, what is God, it actually says, I'll read it out. Sorry, just finding it here. We are from God. So if you look at 1 John chapter 4, verse 6 to 8, we are from God. So I was talking about this reality that we talked about. Whoever recognizes God listens to us. Whoever is not from God refuses to listen to us. This is how we distinguish the spirit of truth from the spirit of falsehood. So if we're from God, we can understand what God says about our life. We can understand the truth about our faith. And then it says, my dear friends, let us love one another, since love is from God, and everyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. Whoever fails to love does not know God because, and what does it say there at the end? Because God is love. This is what we understand about our faith. Loving is essential to our life because we're made in the image and likeness of God. We're meant to be created for loving. That's the deepest essence of who we really are. So when you really think about that, my very being is there to love others. You're designed to love others. You're made for loving. And nobody and nothing can ever take that away from you, whatever you do. And I was praying about that. That's why I think God, Jesus stresses this as his commandment. And he uses the word commandment, and this is about the only time he does. A commandment is something that you can't negotiate with. It's something that you have to have, you have to follow, you have to do. And I was praying a little bit about that. It's not something that you can just do if you feel like. And each of us can look at our own lives and think a little bit about what has loving, or what part has loving played in it. I know from my own experience that before, I've been a missionary now for 10 or so years, but I was also brought up in a Catholic faith all the way through. But I would say at one point in my life, especially when my late teens and early 20s, I wasn't so interested in faith. And also, I didn't really, I would say, live a very Christian life. Not outrightly rejecting it, but more like I just lived for myself. My whole life was sort of I rotated about like trying to find whatever was good for me and not really caring about loving others that much. I probably wouldn't have said it that way, to tell you the truth. I was probably in a very ignorant way living in this sort of style, but my whole philosophy was life about doing whatever I wanted to do, to tell you the truth. I used to play sport. I used to, I don't know, look for pleasure in different ways. I was only really interested in doing things that made me feel good. And I remember that it was a way of life that didn't lead me to feel good about myself. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I don't know whether it's a midlife crisis or something because it's a bit too early for that, but I had an existential sort of crisis where I really felt like my life didn't have meaning the way I was living it. I needed something more. And especially, I had everything that should have made me happy. I had a good job. I had a girlfriend that I loved at the time. I had good family and friends. I had everything in a sense that I had nothing to complain about. But I remember without going into a full clinical depression or anything like that, but I remember getting into real moments where I was really unhappy with the way I was living because there was no meaning. I wasn't doing anything that actually made me feel like I was making a difference with everything that I had. So much so that, it really took the joy out of my life. And even to the point one night, I remember having a bit of a down moment where I don't know what made me think of it, but I had this idea that it wouldn't really matter if I didn't exist. So it wasn't like exactly like suicidal thoughts or anything like that, but a little bit along the ideas that my life doesn't even matter the way that I'm living it. And I remember getting really shocked by that moment because I realized that, I don't want to live like that. I don't believe that's what we're meant to be doing. So it really made me question, what is it that I'm meant to be doing in my life differently than what I'm not doing now? And that's when I sort of refound my faith in a different thing. I went to a different youth camp and other things that actually reawakened it. But it was like a recognition that without that love driving it, without a purpose driving it, our life is very meaningful. And I've been praying a little bit about that a lot because I've been around the world in different places as missionaries and stuff like that. It seems to be very much a pattern that in countries that are very secular, especially countries that are very materialistic, well off and stuff like that, they have much higher levels of depression and dissatisfaction in life than countries that have faith at the center and have a style of life that is much less individualistic, even if they're lacking the basic materialistic stuff that we all have here in Australia, for example. And I've been praying a lot about that as well too, that especially here in Australia, when there's been mental health problems and many things going up a lot, how important is loving at the center of all that? What's going on? And I had the bit of the image of a fish when you take that out of water. Have you seen a fish out of water? Like at the beginning, they don't die straight away. They still jump around. They jump around a lot. They move around a lot. In fact, they actually look like they're dancing in that moment. And if someone came along, imagine like a little boy came along or something and saw it, they would probably think the fish is dancing. But what you really know is that it's lacking the oxygen to live in that moment. Even though it's moving, it's actually dying. And I think a lot of the lives that we see around us and our own lives can easily be along this same way. When we take love out of the picture, this is what happens to us. We can do many things. We can skip around so that it looks okay on the outside, but on the inside, something is seriously wrong, because it is essential to our life that we have love at the center, living that loving, trying to love other people. It's a matter of, and it's not an exaggeration to say that it's a matter of life and death. If you don't know how to love, you don't know how to live. And you'll find your life not having that meaning that it's meant to have, so that you do have that death inside. And it's really, really hard to pull someone out of that if they don't understand what love is. They don't understand what it is to live for other people, not just yourself. So I was praying a bit about that, and maybe one passage that can really help us to understand that in very clear words is 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 to, especially verses 1 to 3, but also you can take it all the way to number 8. But 1 Corinthians 13 is one that you probably know quite well. And it says this: if I speak in the tongues of mortals and angels but do not have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith so as to move mountains or remove mountains, but if I do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but if I do not have love, I gain nothing. Or another version says, it will do me no good at all. It's pretty powerful when you start to think about these things. What it says at the very center, one thing saying that you can do everything. You can have all the gifts in the world. But then the one that really caught me is that you can have all the faith in the world in your life. All the faith so as to remove mountains. But if you don't have love, that faith is useless. It's really powerful, very tough, actually, when you start to go deeper into what that really means. It means love's got to be at the center of everything. If you're not loving properly, if we're not loving, then everything else will turn into something that it's not meant to be. I was thinking of the story of King Midas. Do you know the story of King Midas? The Midas touch. Very, very simple, more or less. He was a king in the olden days, and the idea was that he loved gold so much that he was the richest person around. Somehow, I can't remember the full story. There's a few different versions. One version is he helped someone who was a bit of a stranger, and then that person turned out to be like a genie or someone who could grant him a wish. So he says, in return for you helping me, I'll give you a wish to do whatever you want. So he asked for whatever I touch to turn into gold, because he loved money so much, and that was what he wanted. And then he touched a leaf, turned into gold. He was very, very happy. It's funny because the guy said, you really, really want that? And he said, of course, that's what I want. And then he said, okay, if this is what you want, I'll give it to you. And then he started touching everything. So he touched everything and he kept on creating more and more gold. He was getting very happy because he was getting richer and richer. But then he went and said, oh, I'm a bit tired from all this running around. And he went to try and sit down. And then the chair that he sat down turned into gold. And that's not quite so comfortable from what he really wanted. And the same happened when he tried to go to bed. They're just sleeping on gold the whole time. All his clothes got heavy because you're wearing gold the whole time. And then when he tried to eat, whenever he touched, turned to gold. He couldn't even eat. So he started to cry because obviously he was in like a type of living hell. And when he was there crying, his daughter came in, saw him crying, and ran across to him and tried to give him a hug. And imagine in that moment he tried to stop her, but it's too late. She grabbed hold of him and he touched her and she turned into gold. But imagine the person he loves the most actually he lost her in that moment. Now there's a good story, I know, and a bad story. One bad story is that he's left like that. The good story that I've heard is that the guy who gave him the wish came back and he was crying, and the guy said, "Do you understand like the lesson that you've learned?" He said, "Yes, yes, I promise. Like, just give me back my daughter, and this is the one. That's all I really love and care about." And then the genie gave him basically the chance to bring his daughter back. So he touched his daughter, and his daughter came back to life. And the story ends with them two going around touching everything that had turned to gold and bringing it back to life, bringing it back to what it was really meant to be. Very beautiful story, because this is what love does, actually. Love's what we're all dreaming for. It's what we're all really looking for. And it's what brings life to everything, every single situation, even the different situations that have turned into something else. And in lockdown, we can see many parts of our life that are maybe not perfect to what we would like, but God gives us his ability with our love to convert them back to what they're meant to be. Our relationships, all the different things that we live. And I've really seen in my own life and then in the life of so many people as you accompany them all the time, that this love that we talk about is what gives full fulfillment to your life. It's what brings out the best in people. I remember particularly one moment that I had with a group of catechists, our teenage catechists over in the Philippines. And we had a time after Christmas, one time we all got back together for the first session of the new year. And we all asking each other, like, how was your Christmas? And I remember one young lady was saying that this Christmas, in some ways, I thought was going to be terrible because I got the least amount of gifts that I'd ever been given before. She was getting about 17, 18 or whatever. So she got least amount of gifts that she got given before. But then she said, what happened though was in the moment when, because I've been doing all these things of catechism and learning more about my faith and stuff like that, I started to look around my house and I started to see all the different people that we had working for us. So over there, her house, she had a lot of different people working in different ways. So some looking after the garden, some were looking after the car, many different things. And she said, suddenly I realized I'd never really gave them a gift. So she organized like a party for all the people who work for her family. And she brought them all together with her family, and they all had a meal all together. And then she arranged for gifts for all of the different people that were working for her family. And she was sharing that this joy that she got out of that was made it the best Christmas that she ever had, even though she herself didn't receive what she was basically being given before. But she said, suddenly I learned a new way of living. That we're far better off giving than we are to receiving. Like when we are loving other people, that's when we get what our heart really wants. Because we're not satisfied actually just receiving. Our heart's made to reflect God. We're made in the image and likeness of God, who is self-giving in everything that he does. So I was praying a bit about that. Okay, to go on to the next part. Okay, if we really understand that loving is what we're meant to be doing, what type of loving is Jesus talking about in this commandment? To love one another as I have loved you. And I think the popular culture that we've got around us, you only have to look at all the movies and all the songs and all that kind of stuff. They present love all the time. But I would say that the version that we see of love many times is pretty poor in comparison to what true love is. And without being, I have to go too critical, but you can see that many times love is often portrayed as something just simply romantic or something all about what you get yourself. Or even if it is like portrayed between family members or between friends and stuff like that, many times it's still quite self-seeking in different ways. The true love, I thought it would be really nice this afternoon to really pray with, what does Jesus say about love? And especially, let's use his words. He said, love one another as I have loved you. How did Jesus love us? So this moment of prayer that we're going to have, let's pray with Jesus as our example. Let's try and learn from him how we're meant to be loving. And I thought as a passage that will help us do that, we'll use the passage that we find this John 13, that we find the words that we're basing ourselves on. So if we go to John 13, it's at the beginning of John 13, it's in the Last Supper. It's in the moment when Jesus washed the disciples' feet. It's in the moment when Jesus instituted the Eucharist. And this is when he also talked about loving one another as I have loved you. So let's pray. If we would like to, we can use that as our way of looking towards Jesus. How did Jesus love? Now I thought I won't want to talk for too much longer because I've been talking for a while, but maybe just look at 4 aspects of Jesus's love that we see in John 13. So especially in John 13, we know that there was a moment when Jesus went and washed the disciples' feet. So he got them all together, and then he himself took off all his outer garments and made himself like a servant. He knelt down at all their feet and he washed their feet. And the first thing that caught my attention a lot in this moment was that he did this to every single one of the people there. So Jesus's love, the way that he shows us, the first, how would you say, characteristic we can see is that it's universal. The way that he loves us is that he loves everyone. He makes no distinction between whether you're big or small, whether you're male or female, whether you're from this part of the world or another, whether you're from upper class, lower class, anyone. He washed them all. And this is very clear. Like our love, if we're looking at a type of love that is based upon the love of Jesus, it doesn't only love our favorites. It's much easier just to love the people that you like. We know that. And like I know that myself. I live that all the time. It's much simpler to love the ones that you feel more drawn and attracted to. I remember when I was first becoming a missionary, Father Jay can talk about this as well too, that I remember like for some reason, I kept on finding that my favorite apostolate seemed to be with the young, attractive girls. I don't know why, but it seemed to be that when I was around the younger, prettier looking girls, I was more interested to share my faith with them. And I don't know what was happening, but it just seemed to be that was the case in that point. And then I remember like our priests that were guiding us as well too, and talking about, yeah, well, I think maybe God could be sending only the young, attractive girls to you, or maybe as well too, you're more inclined to love certain people than others as well too. So if we're really following who Jesus asked us to love, it's not making distinctions between the ones that you find the most likable as well too. It's making sure that you're available to help and love whenever you can. So this universality is really important in that part. Second thing that I really saw within Jesus is in his way of loving everyone is that he didn't put any conditions on who he was loving. So if you look at the people who were there, you've got Judas, you've got Peter who's going to betray him, you've got many others that are gonna leave him behind and everything. Like, so his love was unconditional. And I think this is one part that I find of his love that is really powerful and something that I struggle with still now. I try my best as well too, but it's something that I think you have to keep on learning. How to love without putting conditions on it. Because it's difficult to love no matter what, whether or not the person loves you, whether or not the person does even receives your love, whether they throw it back in your face, whether they ignore you, all the different things that happens. Are you still going to love unconditionally? Because that's what Christian love talks about in a very deeper way, far more, I would say, more than most other religions, actually. It's a type of loving that it talks about, I'm going to love all people, whether or not they love me back. And then the third thing I was really catching a lot out of his way of loving is he put everyone else before himself. And especially if you look at this John 13, he makes it very clear. He says, look, I'm meant to be the master, but I'm the one down at your feet, washing your feet. Especially, I was quite touched by this idea of washing the feet. You think about what those feet would have been like. I don't really like washing your feet. If I had to wash your feet, actually, or each one of you, I probably wouldn't like it that much, even as it is. But you're all wearing shoes and probably got pretty clean feet in general. Imagine what it was like back then, when they were walking around in all the dirt and the muck and whatever else that would have been on the ground in that moment. This was what Jesus was washing. And like this selflessness is like that you put other people before yourself, before what you want, before what you would like yourself. And I really find this is like another step of love. When you start to go deeper into types of loving, this selflessness is really important. And I've been really touched a lot by examples of people who have been able to show me that in different ways. I run youth groups, for example, and one thing that's caught me a lot at the moment is everyone's in holidays all the youth, the teenagers and stuff like that, students. We've got some of our youth members who are being leaders towards the other ones that are willing to give up their own holidays to prepare things for the other youth to do. To me, it's been really quite touching. Like this selflessness, that my type of love is that I'm willing to put others first, and that I want to actually love in a way that takes the self out of it. That's what selfless means. So that I'm no longer in the center, that the other person is. And in Jesus, you see that very, very clearly in all the ways that he lives, all the times he prayed at night, trying to for other people, the fact that he would go out of his way to help anyone at any time. He wouldn't mind getting people angry at him if he had to break the Sabbath, for example, to love people in different ways and to heal them. This is the type of loving that puts other people first. So I found him very fascinating that way, Jesus, looking at his way of loving. And even to go a bit deeper, the last aspect that you find, especially if you look at this John 13 is within the part of the Last Supper. What happens in the Last Supper? Jesus wasn't only selfless, but he was actually sacrificial. He gave himself for us to eat. It's pretty amazing. And when we start to pray more and more deeply about that, this style of loving that Jesus shows us on the cross, this style of loving that doesn't only put other people first, but we ourselves sacrifice ourselves for other people. And I remember someone quite wise telling me one time, love is not love unless it involves some type of sacrifice. If there's no sacrifice, then you haven't really reached a proper deep type of love. Love, you can recognize it by when it costs something, because that's when you recognize that you're doing it for them and not just for yourself. And I know a lot of you are parents, a lot of you are people who live for other people all the time. And I always get really inspired all the time by parents who give their whole life so that their other people, their children especially, live through them. And it's amazing when you start to see that take part in their life. And I would hope and I would pray that we don't need to have kids and stuff like that as the only way to do that. That if we learn to pray and to love like Jesus, that we ourselves learn that type of loving that is sacrificial in its nature in all the ways. Okay, so I think I've talked enough for this at the moment. So we'll put some questions for you all to pray with, if that helps. We're going to give you maybe about half an hour's time of prayer. Is that good for everyone? So the idea is that when you have a chance to pray now, you don't have to be here in front of the computer. You can pray in the different ways you can. I'm going to get out of the way of here, so if you would like to, you can see yourself in the church. You can have that as your background as well too, in different parts. But also, it's up to each person. So the idea is that we'll have a chance to pray, and then we'll come back again for another input in about half an hour's time. So that schedule that we put up a bit earlier has been pushed back a little bit because I've talked too long. But I'd say if we come back here by about 2:25, and then we'll start at 2:30 would be the next talk. And these are the questions that we have here. You can see them on the screen. You have here John 13, 34, 35, the one we're saying, love one another as I do. Pray with Jesus. The idea is to talk to God about it, this new commandment. Is it possible to love others as he loves? What's that mean for you? Praying about the essentialness the fact that it's vital to love God, love other people if we're really human beings. Pray with that, with the Genesis 1:26 and 1:4-8, John 1:4-8. How essential do you think it is to love? What examples of human love have you seen that's inspired you? That's actually showed people what it's like to be human. And then reflect on 1 Corinthians 13. I find this really fascinating and one of the more challenging things. Are you convinced that your life gets its meaning and fulfillment in love? Without love, I'm nothing. And talk to Jesus about loving others, whether that's at the center of all your life with everything you do. And ideally, to have the chance to contemplate Jesus himself, his example of loving. Try and see whether your own way of loving can be more universal, can be more unconditional, can be more selfless, can be more sacrificial.